My name is Tim Crosland, and it's so good to be here. I'm a lawyer with the climate litigation charity Plan B. My main job is to sue the government for its criminal and genocidal inaction on the climate crisis. And what that really means is presenting the science to the court and asking the question, well, since the government knows that this is the situation, since it knows that we're heading towards disaster, why does it keep driving in the same direction and calling that progress? The questions we're going to be confronting today as a panel, first of all, what is the risk that the world crosses a 4 degrees Celsius threshold? And second, what are the implications of that? What does that really mean? And you might wonder, well, why are we dealing with something so abstract? Why are we talking about degrees Celsius when all around us there are people dying at scale, there are people being displaced in vast numbers? We're seeing the devastation of our brutal economic system all over the world. Why are we talking about degrees Celsius? Well, there's a reason that we're bringing this to you tonight, and that's this feeling that there is information that people have that is known, that is vital to all of us, that is not being properly communicated. And I'll just give you one example of why we feel that is the case. I spoke to Sir David King in 2016. He was the government's former chief scientist. He led the UK delegation to Paris, produced the Paris Agreement. He told me he'd wanted to connect with the public before Paris, to land with the public, the true gravity of the situation we all find ourselves in together. And then he was stopped from doing that by 10 Downing Street, by the special advisors in 10 Downing Street, who said, we don't want to do that because that's going to upset the Murdoch press. And that's not the right move for us right now. So that's one example of why we feel the right information isn't getting through, and vested interests are actively promoting misinformation. The main purpose of tonight is to face up to the truth of the situation. In the words of James Baldwin, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. We shouldn't be asking a question about 4 degrees because 4 degrees is mad. We shouldn't be anywhere near it. What was said by the Committee on Climate Change in 2008 is 4 degrees is extreme danger. In any sane world, we keep the probability of that to exceptionally low level, less than 1%. Well, let me just read out to you a small bit. I need to end soon. I've had my sign from the ping pong bat. This is a signed statement from Sir David King from 3 days ago. A temperature rise of 4 degrees Celsius would give rise to unmanageable risks, and yet this is the most likely outcome by 2100 unless appropriate global action is taken. There are other people who think it is less than that. 3 degrees, that is still an utterly disastrous outcome. So that is the conversation we're going to be having tonight, and I'll pass on now to Emily.
Do you need me to stand? Hi everyone. Thanks for inviting me. It's really great to be here. I'm Dr. Emily Grossman. I've got a PhD in biology, and I am a science author, science broadcaster, and educator. And I'm also one of the co-founders of Scientists for Extinction Rebellion. And we represent a community of scientists, now 1,600 strong across the globe, who've signed a declaration to say that we now have to take radical action due to government inaction to fight, to combat the climate and ecological emergency. That it's clear and unequivocal that this crisis is happening. And if we don't act and act radically and act now, it will lead to incalculable suffering and loss of life. And scientists are now stepping forward. They're stepping out of their laboratories, of their offices, of the traditional places where scientists have been promised that if we stay behind our desks, behind our microscopes and our data capture, and we report impartially and quietly on the truth, that governments will listen and that they will take action appropriate to that truth, and that it will be reported on by the media. But that has not happened. Scientists have been warning for 40 years now, and that has not happened. It has not been reported on to the extent and the scale of the crisis that we are now in, and governments have not acted anywhere close in line with the warnings that scientists have made. So scientists are now coming out and taking action and saying we need to shout louder, we need to go against what we've been promised as scientists is our role as a scientist, which is not to bring our feelings into it, not to act as humans, but to act as scientists and to be trusted by the government. But no, because the government have let us down. We cannot anymore trust that it's okay to simply report on the facts. So the question that we're addressing in this first point is the 4-degree world. Now, as you've heard, there are top scientists who say that by the end of the century, it's possible or likely that we could cross 4 degrees. That is inconceivable, the world that would be if we crossed to 4 degrees. The projections on our current pathways say that on average we're likely, more than likely, very well, we're heading for 3 degrees, and that there is a chance, a good chance, that we could cross over into 4 degrees. Now, 3 degrees itself is where we're heading on current policies, even if the government carries on with the policies they've committed to, even if they carry on with the policies that they've promised to, and even if they honour the pledges and the targets that they say they hope to make. Even if they carry on along all those pathways, there is still the most likely chance that we will head towards 2.5 to 3 degrees, and a good chance of going over 4. Now, over 2 degrees is impossible to imagine that we could be heading towards that on this planet, and we're going to talk in a moment about what that would actually look like. But I also want to address the fact that there's a sort of feeling in this country, at least by the government, that often comes up, which is like, well, we're not the biggest polluters, we're not the biggest problems. You know, go ask China, go ask America, you know, it's not our problem. We only emit 1.5% of carbon emissions in this country. Well, that is true. However, 1.5% of carbon emissions is still twice as much as we should be emitting per head. Secondly, 1.5% does not take into account aviation, that's flights. It doesn't take into account shipping, that's boats. That's a huge amount of fossil fuel emissions. And more importantly, is that does not take into account the fossil fuel emissions that are embedded in what we consume, in what we eat, in what we buy, in what we use in this country. It's being reported by that we actually are consuming more embedded emissions than either the US or Japan. Plus, we are investing 15% of carbon emissions come from investments from the City of London. We are spending taxpayers' money, pensions, university funds, investing in fossil fuels overseas. And we also have one of the biggest subsidies for fossil fuel industries. So the EU, it was been reported that in the last 5 years, out of all EU countries, the UK actually invests the most in fossil fuel subsidies. That's £2.5 billion in the last 5 years. So anybody that says, oh, we're doing enough, it is not true. Anyone that says, you know, forget it, it's not going to make any difference, you've got to talk to China, got to talk to America, that's not true. And anyway, anyone says that who says that our fossil fuel emissions are dropping, our carbon emissions are dropping, it is slightly true in this country if you ignore everything I've just said and look at just our terrestrial emissions, but that's only because we've switched recently from burning coal to burning oil and burning natural gas. As soon as that sort of evens out, they will start to go up again. And if there's any chance of staying beneath the catastrophe catastrophic warming of 2 degrees. We have to peak our global emissions this year in 2020, and we have to start coming down. And in order for global justice, in order for climate justice, in order to take into account the fact that we are a more developed country than a lot of the world, and we have a responsibility for historical emissions, we need to bring our carbon emissions down immediately, and we need to get to net zero by 2025.
Is it okay if I kneel on this chair instead? Hi all, my name's Matthew Shribman. I studied chemistry and biophysics at the University of Oxford, and I do science communication. I wanted to talk to you about the global system and how it's driving us in completely the wrong direction. We live in a system that is completely dependent on endless growth and ever-accelerating consumption. You know, if you're running a shoe company and you want to sell shoes, then there's not really much incentive to make high-quality shoes. You want to make low-quality shoes so that they're destroyed quickly and people need to buy more of them. And this is completely insane in a world where we understand that we need to be using our resources slower, and yet that's the setup of so many of our systems. We live in a world where in many countries it's a legal requirement for companies, which are the dominant forces in these countries, to make decisions that deliver profits rather than favoring human needs. Human needs are complex. We need a lot of different things, but companies are only driving for profit. And it's the perfect cover, because if it's legal to destroy a coral reef and it will be profitable for your company, then it's almost as if you have to do it, because that's what the system is that we exist within. If you look at the Adani mine that's opening in Australia, some calculations show that the burning of the contents of that mine, the coal that could be removed from that mine, could be enough alone to take us over 2 degrees C. It's completely insane that this mine is opening at all. And meanwhile, you have companies like Coca-Cola who just announced at Davos that they can't possibly reduce plastic bottles because that's what consumers want. And how could they stop selling plastic bottles when it's profitable for them? And misunderstandings are being exploited. They're saying things like, oh, well, glass and aluminium are going to release more carbon, and so we have to avoid those and we have to stick with plastic. And this is totally insane, because obviously plastic pollution is destroying much of the ocean ecosystem. We live in a global system as well, where even it's not just the companies, the entire financial system is designed to draw money and wealth towards certain countries. And this favors greater accelerating extraction still. Countries that have greater debt loads are forced to extract more of their natural resources in order to keep up with those debts. And so the world is being completely ravaged by the system that we live within. We live in a bizarre situation where a tree has no price until it's a pile of paper bills. A river has no price until it's blocked by a wall and turning turbines. And a mountain has no price until it's crushed into minerals. And all of this ongoing extraction is also driving further inequality, which is making things even worse. We know that the impacts of climate change and ecological collapse are going to disproportionately hit disadvantaged populations. It was recently shown that the top 22, I think, men in the United States of America have more wealth than all of the women in Africa combined. We know that the changes on the planet are going to disproportionately affect drylands and islands as well as the world heats up and sea levels rise. And we know that diseases like malaria and dengue fever as well are going to massively accelerate. And all of this is going to disproportionately affect parts of the world that we desperately need to protect. Thanks.
Thank you, Tim, Emily, and Matthew, for your contributions. And I just wanted to say a few contributions as well, by way of closure of this section. For me, and as a representative of the Stop the Manganese campaign and Extinction Rebellion Internationalist Solidarity Network, one of the aspects that we and our communities, you know, communities who are diaspora communities but originally emanate from continents and countries in the global south, unless, you know, there clearly needs to be a paradigm shift and a paradigm change. And so that's why, you know, the second part of the theme for tonight is about now is the time to seize together for planet repairs. And what we are seeking to do and how we've come to find some common ground with Extinction Rebellion is because some of us were on the trajectory of a struggle that is known as a struggle for reparatory justice. And many people often assume that when we say the term reparations, that we are just talking about financial compensation. So of course, compensation for, you know, in terms of climate mitigation and paying, you know, this principle of polluter pays is essential. It is essential. But it is not the only aspect of reparatory justice, because even if we do that and we continue, and the we is the we of the elites who are not listening and who keep burning fossil fuels and who keep extracting from Mother Earth. But if we allow that to happen as members of the human family, then we are going to also be complicit in multiple genocides, which we refer to as omnicide, and of course the ecocide. And inherent within that ecocide is genocide. So from our perspective, we have to recognize that not only do we have to ensure that the resources are released, okay, in terms of the unfair international economic system, not only that they are released, but there is a transformation of that system. And in fact, that kind of thinking was also echoed by Prince Charles at Davos, who spoke about the need for a new economic system. If not, the planet will burn. And that's not just about the planet, we know it's about people and planet. And to us, yes, and for us, that is what we refer to as reparatory justice. And reparatory justice begins with stopping the harms of today, because we cannot necessarily change the past in terms of what has contributed to this situation. And of course, we have to talk about colonization. We have to talk about enslavement. We have to talk about the genocides of many of the world's first peoples, indigenous peoples. And many of us are just here. Yeah, we were never meant to survive, but we did. Because we are the root. We are the mothers and fathers of humanity. But not only do we have to stop the harm, then we have to look at what is this new system? What is this new economy? What is this new political system? And that's where many of you come in. Because we believe that many of you, in terms of your heart and your conscience, and what it is that you're seeking to do is to be part of the change and to be on the right side of history. And for us, that cannot happen without a paradigm of reparatory justice.